hmTV matters.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the Dana Download. I am your host, Dana Arshan Kraslow, and I am so excited to have an amazing guest to introduce all of you today. And as you know, the Dana Download is a podcast that really brings you and introduces you to people from all different parts of my life and industries that really interest me so much. And today we have someone legendary, I am so excited, is joining us via Zoom. He's an actor, director, producer, and playwright, Saul Rubinek, and I'll introduce him in a moment. I want to just tell you a little bit about him first. Saul was born in a refugee camp, or a DP camp, in Germany after World War II, where his father ran a Yiddish theater company. He was only 9 months old when he arrived with his parents as immigrants to Canada. Saul spoke Yiddish and French before he spoke English, but when he was 8, he began acting in English and on stage. And he went on to work in theater as an actor, director, writer in Canada, the US, and Europe. And his work in both film and TV spans 4 decades. A lot of you have probably seen him in Frasier, Warehouse 13, Billions, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, For All Mankind, Star Trek, Grey's Anatomy, Blue Bloods, Hunters, and so much more. And the date of this recording right now is October 23rd, and opening night for his U.S. premiere of playing Shylock, it's a one-man show, is tonight. He also has a new book coming out. I mean, what don't you do, Saul? This is barely your bio. So first, thank you so much for coming on. Let's start with your show, with, the opening night. Tell us about it.
Yeah. Well, playing Shylock is the invention of wonderful playwright, Jewish playwright, Mark Young, who lives in Victoria, British Columbia, that I only met during COVID when we were all bored out of our minds disinfecting vegetables and groceries, right? And he started telling me about this play that he'd written many years ago, which I read and wasn't crazy about. And then together with an old friend of mine who I worked with in theater in Toronto 50 years ago, Martin Kinch, on Zoom like this, we started working on this one-man show. The premise is fascinating and really got me. And I'll tell you the premise, and I'll tell you what really lit up Mark Young, the playwright's eyes. And I'll tell you also what he did that really turned this thing into something interesting and powerful. So the premise is that a production of Merchant of Venice has been canceled by the theater that has been producing it from pressure, outside pressure, basically saying that in this time of rising anti-Semitism, it was irresponsible to continue the run of the play. Why? Well, many of your listeners may not know Merchant of Venice, but it is the Shakespeare play that has in it the only Jewish character that Shakespeare ever wrote, the character of Shylock, which in many ways throughout history has been a lightning rod for anti-Semitism for good reason, and sometimes not for good reason, for over 400 years. So the character that I play is the actor who plays Shylock. And the premise of our play is that the audience is a character in the play. How? Well, the announcement starts that the second half of Merchant of Venice is about to begin. That's what the audience hears in 15 minutes. Second half of Merchant of Venice is about to begin. Please take your seats. Now, they all know they're coming to see a one-man show with me, but that's what the announcement says. Then this very dramatic second act music starts, and I come out having an argument with someone backstage, dressed pretty much the way you see Jewish men look in Williamsburg today, except it's really a early 20th century Hasidic clothes, and with payas, with side curls, and my beard, and my long coat. And I'm having an argument with someone backstage, and then I look up during this loud music, and I look up at the stage manager's booth, and I'm going, stop, cut the music. And then I explain to the audience that there's not going to be a second half of Merchant of Venice because I refused to do it. And the reason I refused to do it is that at intermission, I saw everybody staring at their phones. Everybody backstage was staring at their phones. And what it was a press release from the theater announcing publicly in a press release why they are canceling the run of the show. But the press release was embargoed. It wasn't supposed to be released till tomorrow. We sure as hell weren't supposed to find out at intermission. In fact, we weren't supposed to find out until after we did today's show. And when I find out this early, by accident, it got released online, or who knows why it got released online early. I refused to do the second half of the show. And I said, I'm going to go out. And I go out and I tell the audience this. And then I read the theater statement. And then I get caught up in it, in the story of what's happened. And what really, when we were first developing this, I had this idea. I looked at Mark Liren-Young on Zoom, and I said, what if the actor, this fictional actor who's playing Shylock, what if this actor's name is Saul Rubinek, the child of Holocaust survivors? Why would the child of Holocaust survivors be doing an anti-Semitic play? So his eyes lit up. And in the second that his eyes lit up, you got to remember, I didn't really know him well. I'd never met him except on Zoom. And when I saw his eyes light up, I knew I had a friend for life. I mean, he was so delighted with the meta aspect of this. And I didn't realize this had been a part of Mark Liren-Young's work as a writer, as a director, as a filmmaker, as a children's novelist, as somebody who's involved with ecology and science and saving marine life, that he loves to blur the line between fact and fiction, which is perfect for him. So he then went into a months-long dive, poor guy, of looking at 40 years of my radio, television, video interviews that I'd been doing since 1979. And he found my voice and he heard stories about my life. And then he wrote a draft which he was very nervous about showing me because he had decided on doing something that he wasn't sure I would like. It turns out that not only did I like it, I fell in love with it, and I think it made all the difference in the play. And what he had done is, because he knew from interviews that I had done that my father had broken away from an Orthodox life at 16 years old in 1936 in Poland, had cut off his payas, his side curls. He had come from a very religious family, and he, at 16, decided to go into Yiddish theater in Poland in 1936, which his father thought was an avera, a sin, and indecent. And then Hitler stopped all that by the time he was 19. And he had to come to Canada, and he couldn't speak English. He had to work in a factory, he had to make a living. He had a 9-month-old child, me, in 1949, and Yiddish theater was over. And he'd never gotten a chance to play Shylock, a dream role for him, in Yiddish. It was a dream role for Yiddish actors. Shakespeare had written a part for a Jew. It may be an offensive stereotype, but it was our offensive stereotype. And I tell the audience in our play, let me rephrase that. I mean, it's the role. Yes, in Yiddish theater, it's the role. But on Second Avenue, 100 years ago in Yiddish theater rewrote the play in order to make Shylock the hero. And then Shylock was the role to play. So Mark had written a draft where the reason I'm doing Shylock in Merchant of Venice, directed by my old friend Martin Kinch, who's actually the director of playing Shylock, the one-man show, but we're pretending he's the one who's directed Merchant of Venice. The reason I'm doing it is to honor my father. In other words, not just to honor him, but to play it as he would speak with the accent that he had, in Eastern European accent, and to play Shylock as if I imagined it. This is the way my father would have played Shylock. And that really profoundly affects this actor, who's a version of me, because the show has been canceled. Why? I'm too Jewish for Shylock. There are productions of Shylock where there are productions of Merchant of Venice where Shylock is black. Productions of Shylock, Merchant of Venice where Shylock is indigenous, Palestinian, a woman, but Jewish. And I say to the audience, I say, you know, the director of Merchant of Venice usually has to figure out a way to take literature's most infamous Jew and make him as inoffensive to Jews as possible, usually by making sure the character of Shylock is not presented as Jewish. And so Jew becomes a metaphor for whatever other is currently the most oppressed in whatever community is staging it. And it has to be ritually apologized for by the theater. They do outreach to the local Jewish community for every production of Merchant of Venice in order for not to have the Jews to complain. But I'm being told, and I do, my character does go to the Jewish Community Center and does try to do outreach and does try to talk about his family. But it hasn't done any good, obviously, because the show has been canceled. And so he makes a case, this character, a personal case about his own history and about the history of the play, because he tells the audience at a certain point, he says, listen, at one point at the Jewish Community Center, he says, this young man gets up and he looks me straight in the eye, and he says to me, I am afraid to wear my Mugen David. I'm afraid to wear my Star of David around my neck on my college campus these days, while you're going to be on stage playing a racist caricature. And I say to him, first of all, caricature? And I explain to him, and of course to the audience, I say, Shylock may be a bad guy, but he's the first three-dimensional Jewish character in the history of English literature. Actually, he's the first three-dimensional Jewish character in all of literature. I say, which, other than Hamlet, which of this writer's characters have more notes to play than Shylock? And I explained to the audience who may not know and probably don't know Merchant of Venice that this character is in 5 scenes in this play. He's not the main character. He's not the Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice is a Christian, Antonio. Shylock is the moneylender, the Jew, who Antonio doesn't pay back the 3,000 ducats that he owes him. And the bond is that I get a pound of Antonio's flesh as collateral. And this is why he's the bad guy in the play. And he gets forced eventually to convert to Christianity, this character, because of course he does, because that's what audiences in those days called a happy ending. And I explained that this 5-scene role, why has this 5-scene role made the reputation of actors for 400 years? 400 years. And then I explained to the audience that when this play was written in 1595, there had been no Jews in England, let alone London, for 300 years. For 300 years, none. So this is an extraordinary act of creation to create a human being. You know what audiences saw up until then? They saw puppets with horns or devils with tails in a religious pageant as the Jews. Jews were not considered even human. Maybe they weren't human to a mostly 99%, 98% illiterate audience taught to hate and fear Jews as Christ killers. You couldn't even use the word anti-Semitism for 16th century Elizabethan England when there were no Jews on the streets for 300 years. You could have to use another word. Certainly that word is a modern invention, but the word was really Jew haters, Christ killers, I guess. And it's certainly a different form of fear and hatred than you would have found on the streets of Berlin in 1934. It's a different word. You'd have to find a different word. And so for this extraordinary thing where audiences threw figs, they threw figs and oyster shells and booed, they threw stuff at villains, no matter, not necessarily Jewish villains, any villain on stage, the audience threw stuff. And this writer would have stopped them dead in their tracks. I mean, they're used to seeing Jews on stage who were clown characters, jokes played by the comedians in the company. This role was first played by the star of the Globe Theater, not the low clown actor, No, the guy who had just finished playing Richard III, who would go on to play Hamlet. This is Richard Burbage, half owner of the theater, 30 years old. Why is he playing a five-scene role and not the Merchant of Venice, the title character? Why is he playing a five-scene role? I can tell you as an actor, without a doubt, why he's playing the role. Because the audience would be used to seeing a Jew character, and there's record that he wore the red wig that Jews wore. Why a red wig? Because that's traditionally what Judas had, red hair. It's called a Judas wig, and Jews wore this red wig. He would have had a big, fake, hooked nose that went right down to his chin. And when he made an entrance, the audience would have had their hands back with figs and oyster shells ready to throw them. And then eventually they get a speech like, hath not the Jew eyes, hath not the Jew hands, organs, dimensions, senses, fed by the same food, hurt by the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means. If you prick us, do we not bleed? You tickle us, do we not laugh? You poison us, do we not die? They get a speech like that, would have stopped them dead in their tracks. In order to get a reaction like that from an audience, you have to recast the audience. You have to put them in the 16th century. Even in the 19th century, the character was played sympathetically by Irving in London, famously playing one of the Eastern European Jews that lived near St. Paul's in the poor district where Jews were peddlers and peasants, and there's a tremendous amount of Jew hatred in London, and he played him sympathetically. But you really want to know how this play was written to affect an audience? You've got to be in the 16th century and see a human being for the first time, and not some puppet, not some caricature.
It sounds incredible, and what a full circle moment for you to be born in a DP camp and then doing this play now with this tone of anti-Semitism, and it's so important for you to educate the audience. One, what goes into being a one-man act? What if you forget like sometimes you forget a line on stage, and you could play off each other. What do you do? How much preparation? How long is the show? And then just about that full circle moment.
The show's about 100 minutes.
And you speak for 100 minutes straight?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Well, it is incredible, I guess, if you're not an actor and you haven't been doing this all your life. I mean, I don't know how people do, how people are doctors for 12 hours straight, or people do 8-hour surgeries. That's incredible to me. To surgeons, it's what they do. This is what I do. But in some ways, it's easier than playing off other actors. In some ways, much harder, because you have other actors to take the weight and you can listen. My audience is my scene partner here. And luckily, when you say educate the audience, one of the things that we did was we made sure that it didn't feel like I was educating the audience. We made sure that it was funny and sometimes hilarious and very entertaining. This show is not medicine for the audience. It's really an interesting journey of a character. You got to remember, this is a version of me. This character has just found out that his portrayal of his father playing Shylock has been canceled because he's apparently, this is bad for the Jews, him doing this. It's okay for a black actor to play it, or an indigenous actor, or a Palestinian, somebody else who's a metaphor for Jew. But a Jew playing it today with what's happening today, no, this is outrageous and it's irresponsible. So you got to understand the character is emotional and upset and funny, and talks about his life, and like I showed you, talks about the history of the play and the history of the character. So preparing for something like this, first of all, we were on Zoom. We had no idea if anybody was going to want to do the show. We were on Zoom and it was COVID. Then when we finally had a script that we liked, it took almost a couple of years because everybody was busy doing other things. So we finally had a script we liked. I Zoom auditioned this for a number of theaters across Canada. Nobody wanted it. They don't tell you why, Dana. They just say it doesn't fit into their season. But every place that I do this, I say this theater, and I name it, is the one that canceled Merchant of Venice. Well, I guess they were scared of that. But who knows why they were. It was a terrible time. And I Zoomed this audition before October 7th. And the month before October 7th, the theater said yes. And this, by complete coincidence, was a theater that Martin and I helped found in 1972, 53 years ago. and when we were in our 20s, and now it was called a different theater, and it was a very big, important theater. But back then, we were just struggling to make a living when we founded it. And they said yes. And then a month later, or 2 months later, was October 7th. And I said, wait, they're now going to cancel it. It's not going to be on for a year. They're going to cancel it after what happened in Gaza. They didn't cancel it. God bless them. They didn't cancel it. And then when we put this show on for the very first time, we had no idea what the reaction of the audience was going to be. We were prepared for protests from Jews and non-Jews. We were prepared for all kinds of things. We rehearsed what to do with protesters. People shouted out in the middle of the show how to deal with it. And if there was violence, we didn't know there was violence in Toronto. People were shooting indiscriminately at Jewish schools last October when I did this in October in last year in Toronto. And so we didn't know, but it turns out that nobody protested it because the premise was a safety perimeter, because of the premise was an illusion that a production of Merchant of Venice had been canceled. And if there are any bad guys, I guess bad guys is not a right term, it would have been the Jewish community putting pressure on the theater.
Well, I want to thank you from the entire Jewish community for not giving up. You were so resilient. And I guess being an actor, you said that you were rejected by so many theaters and you kept going. So we have a few minutes left. We can go over though, but I want to know, how can people here in New York, in our area, how can they see you? How can they get tickets? And I also want to talk about your new book. So tell us everything that's going on and how everyone can come support you.
PlayingShylock.com is how they get tickets. It's at Polanski Shakespeare Center in Fort Greene. It plays Tuesday through Saturday night at 7:30, and their matinees on Wednesday and Saturday and Sunday at 2 o'clock. And they can buy tickets at PlayingShylock.com.
And it runs through December, is that right?
December 7th is a Sunday afternoon, is our final show. And it's selling, so they should hurry and try to get tickets. And also, please stay after in the lobby if they want to talk to me. We decided not to do a talk back with the audience. We figured they're just going to ask me about Frasier and True Romance and Unforgiven, and so we didn't do a talk back. And besides, I've been talking to the audience and including them. I talked to them in the audience the whole show, so we didn't do a talk back. But if people want to talk to me, I'm happy to do it. I come down, it takes me about 10 minutes. I'll be in the lobby and I'll talk to them. The other thing that I'm doing in the lobby is I have this new book called All in the Telling. This is based on a play that I wrote that I'm hoping is going to be starting in Toronto and hopefully come to New York in the next 18 months. All in the Telling is a story about my own family and about me and about my life and my parents. And the way it's described is it weaves together. If you don't mind me reading this, because it'll be more articulate than me, is that okay?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Here's what the cover looks like.
Those are your parents?
Yeah, that's me.
Handsome. Are either of your parents still alive?
No, my parents were born in 1920. I'm 77.
My grandfather lived to 102, so almost 102. By the way, I'm the granddaughter of an Auschwitz survivor, also from Poland. So I am.
In 1986, I took my parents back to Poland to have a reunion with the Polish farmers that hid them for 2.5 years. This book is about how I came to do that. And it is not, and it's filled with why I did it, which is filled with lies. And it's very funny. It's a true story. It's a murder mystery. It's a operatic family drama. And what it is when I fell in love with a non-Jewish woman, I discovered that my immigrant Holocaust survivor parents were not as cool with it as I thought they would be. Their reaction is really biblical. And I was desperate to fix my relationship with my mom and dad. So I lied and I told them I was writing a book about their story of love and survival. It wasn't true. And in chronicling this pretend book, I discovered extraordinary loyalty, bravery, but I also found out lies and secrets and deceptions that were buried in my family's past. So that's what this is about. This. So
That's not your typical Holocaust book, that's for sure. It sounds fascinating.
it's I don't know what typical Holocaust book is, but it is not that.
I
And it is, as I say, based on a play, and I adapted it into this book, and it'll be available in the lobby of the theater starting, I think, tomorrow or the next day. And I'm really proud of it. It took me 5 years to put this together with the support of my wife and children. So it also, because my father's a character in the book, and because my father is, I'm kind of playing a version of my father on stage. This is a very important journey to answer some of your question about what it took to go from developing this to get it on stage. I couldn't have done it without the brilliance of Mark Laird Young coming up with a way of portraying, with that idea that I would play my father playing Shylock. And I couldn't have done it without this 60-year-old relationship I have with the director, Mark Kinch,
okay.
and the designer, Sean Kerwin. And I mean, it's a really, as you know, it takes a village to create a decent piece of work. And I'm proud of it. And I think at 77 years old, I wouldn't believe me be going to do 100 minutes on stage, alone on stage, if it didn't matter to me, if I didn't feel the story was worth telling, and if I didn't get the reactions I got. It was an extraordinary reaction in Toronto, not just from the Jewish community, because people related to it from all cultures, all kinds of immigrant children related to my immigrant experience. And that's very important, especially, you know, that we're dealing with this in a time where, yes, there is terrible division in the world. Jews among other cultures, are suffering terribly.
That leads me to one of my questions. You were born in a DB camp, your parents survived the Holocaust, and then you had this huge career acting in incredible roles from Star Trek to Frasier, nothing to do with Holocaust. And here at I don't know, some might call this the peak of your career, the height of your career, because you're starting so many new chapters. What do you think your parents would say to you if they saw this?
My parents already saw.
But did they see the pivot to Holocaust education in your work? Oh, they did already. What did they get to see?
Well, first of all, when I went to Poland in 1986, together with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, that was a documentary film that I filmed. That documentary film, called So Many Miracles, which chronicles my parents' reunion with the farmers that saved them, played all over the world. I was only 38 years old when that happened. And it played 3 times to sold out houses at the Toronto Film Festival, and played on Canadian television, then in Polish television, German television, American.
So you have really been weaving your family's story into your career for decades now.
Sometimes not on purpose, sometimes just to try to survive, sometimes filled with lies in order to survive, in order to, as this book is about. Yes. And then in 1990, I did a 2-person show called The Quarrel, which is an adaptation of the Chaim Grada Yiddish story called Mein Krieg mit Herschel Resigner, my war with Herschel Resigner. I call it My Dinner with Herschel. It's about 2 Holocaust survivors, one who is a Hasidic Jew and runs a yeshiva, and the other one who's a secular Jew. And it's about their argument. One believes that the only way post-Holocaust Jews can survive is to reject the outside world and to create a community of just Jews. And the other, the secular one, who writes for the Jewish Forward, believes that the only way is to join hands with the rest of the world. It's a true postmodern post-Holocaust Jewish dilemma, as exemplified in 2 different characters. I did that when I was still, under 40, I think. And then I did Hunters with Al Pacino, which is a series about only 5 years ago, which is where I play a Holocaust survivor, part of a vigilante group who goes around trying to get justice and vengeance against Nazis in 1970s New York. So I have not only, this is not the only time I've dealt with this subject. And there are other shows that I've done that relate to my experience. I've also played non-Jews, of course, and I've played all kinds of characters. I played rabbis at least 3 times. I did a Yiddish film called Shtetl, which you can now see in the Upper West Side, by the way, every weekend at the New Plaza Cinema on 67th Street, every weekend, for as long as it gets an audience, you can see a movie called Shtetl. And Shtetl is a Yiddish film, all in Yiddish, that I did in Ukraine. We built a shtetl north of Kiev 6 months before Putin attacked. And this is a film that takes place on one day in 1941, right the day of Operation Barbarossa, which is the day that the Germans turned on Russia, invaded Ukraine, and killed and eventually destroyed thousands of shtetls all over Europe. And it's one day. So this is also a Holocaust-related piece. I'm very proud of it. And that's on the Upper West Side, ironically, coincidentally, at exactly the same time as I'm playing Shylock in New York, in Brooklyn. So my parents had an opportunity to see it. But you're right. I wish my parents were alive to see me playing Shylock. You couldn't be more right. I always see an image not only of my father, but of the grandfather I never knew, of my father's father, my mother's father. I never knew them. They were murdered, and they're in front of my eyes when I'm performing.
Oh, they're watching you for sure. They are absolutely watching you, and your work is amazing. I didn't realize I always knew how diverse your background was, but I didn't realize how often your personal story played a role or tied into these characters, and that's incredible. I could talk to you forever. I do have one closing question that I ask every single one of my guests, and it's: is there one moment in your life that changed how you see the world?
When I was 7 years old, we had just moved to Ottawa from Montreal, where I grew up on the streets, even at 5 and 6 years old, part of gangs, French Canadian working class anti-Semitic neighborhood, Catholic hating Jewish immigrant neighborhood, war between children and teenagers, no matter how young. I went to Ottawa, which is suddenly I was for the first time in a public school, barely able to speak English, and grew up fighting. Somebody looked at me the wrong way, I would be violent. My parents didn't know what to do with me. And it was free to go to theater school for children if you were a boy, because no boys went in 1956. You weren't going to find a boy going to theater school because he would be called all kinds of names. Girls had to pay because hundreds of girls wanted to go. Boys, so my parents knew it was free. They had no money, just struggling. So they sent me, because I guess my father had been in theater. He thought maybe this will help him. And the day that changed my life was the first day that I went to the Ottawa Little Theater School for Children, theater school for children, at 7 years old, with my fist clenched, ready to fight. And instead, the wonderful women who were both British, living in Ottawa, both of them Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts, RADA graduates from London, wonderful women who taught us children, taught me how to collaborate with other children to tell stories. And the truth is, Dana, I never left there. I never left there. I'm still that 7-year-old discovering how to tell stories with other people.
Wow. Not to diminish my other guests, but I think that was the most powerful answer to that question that I've had yet. What a story. Thank you so much. I really could talk to you forever. I know that we didn't even make a dent on your accomplishments, but is there anything you want to make sure the audience leaves with? Is there one, obviously your playing Shylock, that's a mouthful. Playing Shylock, we want to promote that. Your new book, All in the Telling. That's not the full name, right? Tell me the full name of the book.
All in the Telling, a somewhat true story, is also available starting now on Amazon. You can find it. All in the Telling, a somewhat true story. And the audiobook will be available, I think, in a week or two. Sorry, what did you say?
Any final message?
I'm very grateful to you that, you have me to talk about my life and my work. And I don't, my message is in my work. If you want a message from me, come see me do this live, because there's nothing like live theater. The audience changes my performance every night. So come change my performance in playing Shylock at the Polanski Shakespeare.
And I personally would love to. I'm going to go on your website and find a date. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Where are you right now, by the way? Where are you, this very moment?
I'm in Fort Greene, I'm a 4-minute walk from the theater. And
I,
so go to playingshylock.com, please, or reach out to Amanda or Kate, who's online here, and they'll find tickets for you. Okay.
I
I
started my broadcast career as a one-woman show. You're a
Oh,
one-man act now, reporter for News 12, Brooklyn and the Bronx, but I spent all my time in Brooklyn. So I know that area very well, and I really would love to see you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to all of you
okay.
for listening. I hope you found this episode as interesting as I do. I know you do. Hope you get to see Saul in his new play, and I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to the Dana Download. And also thank you to Mark Swern, our tech director, who is here today making sure that everything runs smoothly. Really appreciate it, Mark, and I hope you all have a great day.